Here's really the big story, right? The big takeaway, the COVID-19 pandemic and its subsequent impact on the global economy, followed by the racial unrest that is now taking place and will have an effect on housing. Now, you hear a lot about the stock market and how it's up or it's down because of all these developments that we've experienced. But the stock market, look, it affects for about 10% of all Americans and less than 2% of all of the people on Earth. But you know what does affect all people? Housing. Because one way or another, we all need a roof over our heads. So we thought this was the topic that we should drill down on. Joining us now, Jason Hartman, who knows housing, by the way, from the inside out. He's an extremely successful real estate investor who connects with thousands of people weekly on jasonhartman.com, where he shares some of his insight with others, and he's here to do it for us right now. All right, Jason, let's start with this. First, have these times that we've been going through with the economic situation, the pandemic, et cetera, have they caused home prices to go down?
Well, Rick, thanks for having me back. It's counterintuitive, but the exact opposite has occurred. Now, when we look at home prices and talk about this stuff, virtually all of the statistics, any of us here, are national statistics. And as you know, the housing market in the country, like as large as the United States, obviously there are so many markets. It's a huge country, about 400 local markets, if you will, that can really be divided into three categories: linear, cyclical, and hybrid. So to answer your question, expensive housing markets were already suffering before the pandemic. There were already lots of stories about expensive properties in New York City, in Los Angeles, even in less expensive markets like Seattle, certainly San Francisco, South Florida, Miami area, Boston, Washington, D.C. to a lesser extent, because that's got the government that skews the stats. Those were already suffering before the pandemic. But interestingly, now we are seeing this mass migration out of high density areas, and the housing market, by and large, is up. There's very little inventory and lots of demand.
So let's call it the burbs, for lack of a better term, as we've always referred to it here in America. If you live in the suburbs and you have a home and you're hunkering down in it, keep it. Don't sell it, because the value you have in your home is pretty much the value you have right now as a person, right? I mean, monetarily, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, the suburbs, I think those homes are going to do very well through this. Actually, I think if you own suburban properties now, keep them, because there is a tidal wave of people moving in your direction that want to be out of high density areas. They don't want to take mass transit. They don't want to get into elevators. And you know, if you live in a condo complex that is in a suburban style city that is 4 stories or less, you're probably okay. But if you live in anything that's considered mid-rise, which is 5 stories and up, or high-rise, 12 stories and up, I would really be concerned about properties like that. And, you know, we're now already witnessing the second wave of infection. And you alluded to the racial strife and the riots. And, you know, that's just one more reason not to live in cities.
Let me ask you a question, though, because everything that you're saying, although conflictive with what we would think is going on, may make some sense if you consider that there's a lot of money out there. I mean, the government's been pouring money. One of the things it's done is something called forbearance, which I learned from you originally, by the way, which is where they will tell you you don't have to pay your mortgage for the next 3 months, 6 months, some even a year. Okay, so let's suppose that's the reason that everything is still stable and nothing has imploded or exploded. But what happens when that forbearance program ends, when the government stops the gravy train, so to speak? Is that when we'll see the problem? Yeah,
very good question. And the real answer is none of us know. None of us know, because the economy has a lot of challenges ahead. I mean, we still have massive unemployment. To use a phrase we've all become familiar with relating to the virus, the curve has flattened in terms of unemployment, right? But still, things are pretty sketchy out there. And these forbearance programs, it's still unclear, Rick, as to whether or not that's a layaway program, if there might be some forgiveness, or if it will just be tacked on to the back of the loan, or what the workout is going to be at the end of these forbearance periods that are 3, 6, or 12 months. This is what the government does. They always distort every market because they come in with aid and bailouts and stimulus, and it just distorts things, and it makes it hard for any of us to know what's really going on. So to some degree, it's definitely a guess. But I would say for sure, low-priced housing, necessity-oriented housing in suburban markets where people can socially distance, where they feel safe, where they're not in cities that are having riots and civil unrest, and they're not taking elevators and mass transit where they might catch a virus, those are a pretty safe bet, because the other thing that's happened during this whole thing is everybody's really realized that the home is the center of the universe. Yep. And since so many people are working at home now, they actually need a larger home. They need more space. So instead of living in that $4,000 a month, 600 square foot condo or apartment in New York City, for $1,500, they can get a 12 to 1,500 square foot suburban house with a yard and a 2-car garage in a nice community, and they're already working at home. So what's the difference if it's 10 miles away or 100 miles away or 1,000 miles away? It's all the same.
You tell it so well. Wow, Jason Hartman, a guy who's made millions and millions of dollars in real estate, and he started as a kid investing in real estate, and we're just so glad to be able to have him on to take us through these explanations, because they do make sense. We'll follow to see, and hopefully we'll be able to have a conversation again. Thanks so much, Jason. Always appreciate it, my friend.
Thanks, Rick.